The morning of January 6, 2026 started like any other winter day in Beijing. Commuters sipped their tea, vendors prepared their stalls, and 21 million people went about their routines. But high above the city, something catastrophic was building. A massive atmospheric river, loaded with unprecedented moisture from southern China, was about to collide with an Arctic cold front stalled directly over the capital. What happened next would transform Beijing into an underwater nightmare for 39 straight hours. At exactly 6:10 a.m., the first wall of water crashed through the streets. Not a gradual rise, not a slow flood, but a sudden, violent surge that caught everyone completely off guard. The frozen winter ground couldn't absorb a single drop. Storm drains designed to handle typical rainfall were instantly overwhelmed. Within minutes, Beijing's sophisticated drainage system didn't just fail, it completely collapsed. The Summer Palace, that jewel of Chinese Imperial architecture with its serene lakes and ancient pavilions, became ground zero for the unfolding catastrophe. Kunming Lake, normally a picture of tranquility, transformed into something terrifying. Water levels didn't just rise, they exploded upward, surging between 7 and 11 meters above danger thresholds. This wasn't flooding anymore. This was an inland sea being born in the heart of Beijing. Stone bridges that had stood for centuries vanished in seconds, swallowed whole by churning brown water. The famous 17-arch bridge disappeared entirely beneath the waves. Ancient pavilions, architectural treasures that had survived wars and revolutions, were now flooding floor by floor. You could actually hear the foundations cracking and crumbling under the relentless pressure. The sound was like thunder, but underground. A deep, grinding roar that sent chills through anyone close enough to hear it. The protective embankments around the palace grounds held for exactly 47 minutes before the first breach, then the second, then the third. Each failure sent torrents of water cascading into surrounding neighborhoods with the force of 1,000 fire hoses. Entire districts near the palace simply ceased to exist as recognizable places. Streets became rivers, parks became lakes. 3 to 6 meters of water, that's up to 20 feet, covered everything. Cars weren't just submerged, they were floating through historic hutongs like massive steel boats without captains. A taxi was spotted spinning slowly past a Ming Dynasty temple. Delivery trucks bobbed up and down where markets used to stand. But the real horror was happening underground. Beijing's extensive network of pedestrian tunnels and underground shopping areas became death traps. Water poured down stairways with such force that anyone caught below had virtually no chance of escape. The city's hospitals faced an impossible situation. Emergency generators, supposedly waterproof and fail-safe, began shutting down one by one as water found its way into electrical systems. Operating rooms went dark. Life support machines fell silent. Medical staff worked by flashlight, moving critical patients to higher floors while water climbed the stairs behind them. One doctor later described racing against the flood with newborn infants in his arms, knowing that every second counted. Government buildings, symbols of order and control, were forced to evacuate as lower floors flooded. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very institutions meant to coordinate disaster response were themselves drowning. By midnight on that first day, central Beijing looked like something out of an apocalypse film. The Summer Palace stood like a lonely island surrounded by an endless expanse of dark water, lit only by scattered emergency lights that flickered like dying stars. But Beijing wasn't just flooding, its entire infrastructure was disintegrating. The subway system, pride of the capital, became a network of underground rivers. Millions of gallons of water poured through tunnels designed for trains, not tsunamis. Station after station went dark as electrical systems shorted out. Thousands of people trapped in the tunnels had to be evacuated through maintenance shafts, climbing ladders in pitch darkness while water rose beneath them. The airports told their own story of chaos. Beijing Capital International, one of the busiest airports on Earth, watched helplessly as 1.8 meters of water covered its runways. Planes sat like beached whales in a brown ocean. Daxing International Airport, that architectural marvel opened just years before, fared no better. Combined, these two airports had to cancel 4,610 flights. Picture 500,000 people, 520,000 to be exact, suddenly stranded with nowhere to go and floodwaters rising around them. The power grid collapsed like dominoes. Substations designed to withstand earthquakes couldn't handle being submerged. One after another, 18 districts went dark. That's 10.6 million people suddenly plunged into freezing winter darkness while water rose around them. No lights, no heat, no way to charge phones or call for help. Just the sound of water rising and the occasional crash of another building giving way. China's high-speed rail network, engineering marvels that connected Beijing to every major city, ground to a halt. Tracks disappeared underwater. Signaling systems failed catastrophically. Thousands of passengers found themselves trapped in stations as floodwaters rose around the platforms. Some stations became islands with no way in or out except by boat, if you could find one. The numbers alone tell a story of devastation that's hard to comprehend. 39,400 buildings across the metropolitan area suffered severe damage. But here's what that number doesn't capture. 9,500 of those buildings didn't just flood, they collapsed entirely. Imagine entire apartment complexes, shopping centers, office buildings simply ceasing to exist, reduced to rubble beneath the churning water. Emergency services faced an impossible task. Fire trucks stalled in deep water. Ambulances became boats, then anchors. Rescue helicopters sat grounded, unable to fly in the severe weather that continued to pummel the city. Communication networks partially collapsed as cell towers toppled and switching stations flooded. Families couldn't reach each other. Rescue coordinators couldn't coordinate. The very systems designed to help in disasters had themselves become victims. The human toll was staggering. 580 people confirmed dead, each one someone's parent, child, friend. 60,300 injured, overwhelming every medical facility still functioning. But perhaps most haunting were the 1,800 missing, simply vanished into the floodwaters, their fates unknown. These weren't just statistics. These were lives cut short, families torn apart, futures erased in muddy water. The economic impact rippled far beyond Beijing. $369 billion in damages, that's more than the GDP of many countries. Tourism, a massive industry for the capital, collapsed overnight. Who would visit the Summer Palace when it sat in the middle of a disaster zone? Cultural preservation costs skyrocketed as teams scrambled to save priceless artifacts from water damage. But the effects went even further. Beijing sits at the heart of northern China's logistics network. When Beijing drowns, supply chains across the nation and even internationally grind to a halt. Yet in this darkness, something remarkable happened. As government systems failed and official rescue efforts were overwhelmed, ordinary people stepped up. Neighbors who had barely spoken before were suddenly forming human chains through chest-deep water, passing children and elderly residents to safety. Restaurant owners opened their doors, sharing whatever food remained with anyone who needed it. In the historic neighborhoods around the Summer Palace, volunteer rescue teams navigated flooded streets in whatever boats they could find. Fishing boats, pleasure craft, even inflatable pool toys. They went door to door, window to window, pulling families from upper floors of buildings that might collapse at any moment. One rescuer later described hearing a baby crying from a second-story window and swimming through freezing water to reach the trapped family, knowing that every minute counted. Cultural experts and archaeologists worked through the night in conditions that would terrify most people. As water rose around priceless artifacts in the Summer Palace, these dedicated individuals formed bucket brigades, moving what they could to higher ground. They wrapped ancient scrolls in plastic, carried centuries-old pottery piece by piece up crumbling stairs, all while the building shook with the force of water battering its foundations. The flood raged for 39 hours straight. That's a day and a half of non-stop rising water, of buildings collapsing, of families huddling in darkness wondering if help would come. But finally, on the morning of January 7th, something changed. The rain began to ease. The atmospheric river that had been dumping moisture on Beijing finally moved on. As pale winter sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days, it revealed a city transformed. Kunming Lake still overflowed its banks, but the violent churning had calmed to a gentle lap. Across Beijing, water began its slow retreat, leaving behind a landscape of mud, debris, and destruction. Buildings stood like broken teeth. Streets were canyons of sludge. The Summer Palace, that symbol of Chinese cultural achievement, bore scars that would take years to heal. But Beijing still stood, battered, flooded, and muddy, but still there. Because that's what defines the spirit of this ancient capital. Through dynasties and revolutions, invasions and disasters, Beijing endures. Even when flood waters rise high enough to drown an empire, even when modern infrastructure fails and ancient monuments crack, the city and its people refuse to surrender. The 2026 Beijing flood stands as the most devastating flood in the city's recorded history. It exposed vulnerabilities nobody imagined existed. It tested every system, every plan, every assumption about urban disaster preparedness. But it also revealed something powerful about human resilience, about neighbors helping neighbors, about ordinary people becoming heroes when everything else fails. As rescue teams continued their work and the long process of rebuilding began, one image stuck in everyone's mind: the summer palace at dawn on January 7th, surrounded by slowly receding floodwaters, damaged but not destroyed, scarred but still standing. A reminder that some things, some places, some spirits are simply too strong to drown. That's it for today, folks. See you in the next video.